Welcome and good morning. Welcome to a new day, to a new opportunity to learn and grow and develop. God bless you. I need to introduce myself because sometimes I get people to watch and they don't know what this is, who I am. So I am MRJ, and I'm doing this Songs of Psalms, which is a songwriting study on the book of Psalms. The book of Psalms has the most songs about life, about struggle, about praise. It has prayers. And so we are doing a songwriting study on the book of Psalms. And so that's what we're doing every morning. And so today we're going to be diving into Psalm 89. This is part 2. Yesterday we did a little bit of an introduction of Psalm 89, and it's a wonderful, full, robust psalm. Good morning, Debbie. How are you this morning? Thank you for joining. God bless you. Happy Friday. And so yesterday we introduced just a little bit about Psalm 89. We talked a little bit in detail about the writer of Psalm 89, which is Ethan the Ezrahite. And we said he's a Levite. He was one of David's 3 chief musicians. And here in this particular psalm, he was referred to as Ethan. But in 1 Chronicles 16, we learn that he has another name. And his other name is Yeduthan, and that was the more popular name. Whenever it was talked about the 3 chief musicians, it would always be mentioned that the 3 chief musicians were Heman, Asaph, and Yeduthan. And Yeduthan is also Ethan. And the scriptures lets us know that he was a wise man, that he was so wise. And then Solomon came along and surpassed his wisdom. And Solomon was known as the greatest, most wisest man that ever lived. So Ethan was very wise. And because of it, David appointed him as one of his chief musicians. And so you can go back and listen to what we talked about yesterday and a little bit about who he was and his being selected as this musician and this leader in the land of Israel. So as a very wise and knowledgeable man, it was really fascinating to me to understand why he wrote this psalm, right? Because if he's so wise and he can talk about any subject and understand things, he was also a seer. The Bible describes him as a seer, is someone who can interpret things from a spiritual perspective, who has a relationship with God, and can hear from God clearly about a situation. For someone like him, with those qualifications, for him to write a song, I said, I have to pay attention. I need to understand why he wrote this psalm, right? Because also, this was the only psalm that we know of that he wrote. There are no other psalms that are accredited to him. So, and he could have written about any subject because, again, he was a wise man. So for him to write this particular psalm, we had to pay attention. We have to pay attention. He felt compelled to write about the promise that God made to David. And this psalm basically is him saying, it looks like you went back on your promise. It looks like you went back on your promise. And so, again, he had to address it. And being the wisest Solomon, or before Solomon, he was the one. He was the one. So he basically took it upon himself to confront God. And so many of the Psalms that we've read here in the Songs of Psalms journey many of them, they usually start with a complaint or a prayer, and they typically end in trust, in hope, in joy, in praise. But this psalm here, it begins with joy and praise, and it ends with a sad complaint and petition. And so Ethan, aka Yeduthan, uses this conversation in Psalm 89 to tell the account of what God promised. And then later on, he mourns that he mourns and questions God on his actions. I think that that's pretty brave and bold of him to do. He confronted God. He confronted God. This wasn't just a simple prayer, like, God, where are you? Like, it wasn't anything like that. This was 52 verses long. Thank you, Debbie. Our scribe is taking notes. Thank you, Debbie, for that. That's so nice of you. This psalm is 52 verses long. And if you think that 52 verses is a long psalm, well, I'm sorry, in our modern day society, there is a song that's longer than that. Not a psalm, a song. So in the Guinness Book of World Records, there was an award that was given to the longest song ever released. The longest song ever released. Maybe some of you know it. But for those that don't know it, the song is called In the Garden, and it was written by Michael Bostwick. And let me tell you something. This song is 3 hours long. 3 hours long. And then he wrote a book to publish the lyrics that go to the song. Excuse me. Let me take a little sip here. He published a book with the lyrics of the song. Over 7,700 words, 7,730 words in that book, which are lyrics. So, for Ethan to write a 52 verse song, psalm, prayer, it's nothing. It's nothing. So, before we get into it and before we read it, let's look at this psalm from this angle. Excuse me. Does God keep his promises? Does God keep his promises? This is what the wisest man before Solomon, or around Solomon's time, this is what this man wrote. Does God keep his promises? That's the lens that we're going to read this from. And let's ask ourselves a couple of these questions as we're going through it. Does God keep his promises? In other words, can anything happen that would change God's mind about a promise he's made to you, to me? Can anything influence that and change that? We got to think about that, right? Did anything change that would have influenced what God said to David? Because that's what Ethan is confronting God on. Will God go back on a promise? Will he go back on it? Or does he create conditions to that promise? Saying, if you do this, I'll do that. And is that even a promise? Is that even a promise? Or is it a bribe? Now listen, don't judge God if that's how it is. Because we parents do the same exact thing. Right? We tell our kids, if you do this, if you clean your room, right? If you clean your room, then I'll take you to the park. Or I'll take you shopping, or I'll buy you that thing that you want. Yes or no? Don't we do that? So, I don't know. We can decide. We can decide. Does God create conditions for his promises? But again, here we're just exploring the question, does God keep his promises? And do the promises stay intact despite sin or obedience? Or let's just say sin, disobedience. Do they stay intact despite sin or disobedience? Can sin or disobedience cancel a promise? And why do we ask that? We ask it because, we say that God is not a man. He does not lie. He's never going to go back on his word, right? That's what we say. God's not going to go back on his word. So would he keep a promise in place even when people rebel and disobey and disregard what he said? It's interesting, right? It's interesting. So, let's just take a look at it. Let's dive in. We won't finish this today because again it's long, but there are some things we want to touch on today and get started. Verse 1. This is how Ethan starts this psalm. I will sing of the Lord's great love forever. With my mouth I will make your faithfulness known through all generations. I will declare that your love stands firm forever, that you have established your faithfulness in heaven itself. Let's see. I also have the Message Bible, and this is what the Message Bible says. Your love, God, is my song, and I'll sing it. I'm forever telling everyone how faithful you are. I love how they translated that. I'm forever telling everyone how faithful you are. I'll never quit telling your story of love. How you built the cosmos, meaning the heaven, and guaranteed everything in it. Your love has always been our lives' foundation. Your fidelity has been the roof over our world. Ooh, that's good. That's good. That's how the Message Bible translates that. So, Ethan, as we can see, aka Yeduthan, he starts this prayer / complaint. He starts it off as praise. And he's smart, right? Because the word of God says, enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. And I like it. Ethan is developing a strategy here. He's about to lay it on thick. He's about to give the Lord, he's about to let it all out. So he's gonna use the rest of the psalm to point out what a broken promise looks like. So he's being strategic here. And but honestly, I think he's being sincere and genuine. Oh, my daddy is with us. Good morning, Daddy. Good morning. God bless you. I love you, Daddy. Thank you for joining. Oh, my biggest supporter, my dad. I love him. Thank you, Daddy, for being here. We're doing part 2, I think, part 2 of Psalm 89, Daddy, if you want to listen along, if you can. So, David, I'm always talking about David. Ethan, I think he's being sincere and genuine to say that, I'm going to enter in with praise first. I'm going to start this conversation with thanksgiving and praise. I'm going to, that's why he says, I will sing of the Lord's great love. I will make your faithfulness known. So he's being strategic, and he's saying, regardless if you went back on your promise, I'm not gonna stop singing. Nothing's gonna stop me from doing my job. And even if the people of Israel brought about the consequences of you not sticking to your promise, I'm still gonna sing. Ethan is rightfully giving God his praises, and he will make it known that God is faithful through all generations, right? And that's what he believes in. Again, he thinks that God is not being faithful because of the situation that they were in, and he's confronting God. But he was like, I'm gonna sing. I'm gonna sing. Whether there's darkness, whether there's hopelessness, whether there's fear, whether we're in captivity, we're gonna sing. Why? Because singing inspires and restores hope again. It renews our faith. It renews our faith. So he's about to lay it on thick, like I just said. And he doesn't delay any further. The first two verses, he says, I'm coming in with thanksgiving and praise. And then he, he's like, okay, verse 3, we get to verse 3, and he's like, all right, now, this is why I'm here. This is why I am here. He's going to remind God of the promise that he made to the people of Israel. Verse 3, you said, I have made a commandment. You said, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David, my servant. I will establish your line forever and make your throne firm through all generations. And when I read this, I was like, is Ethan being a little snarky with God? Is his tone a little snarky? Because the way he starts it off, he's like, you said, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David, my servant. And to me, that language, you said, it's like he's pointing the finger at God. He's like, you said. I'm reminding you of what you said. You made a covenant. That's how he's talking to the Father. That is how he is talking to the Father. You said. So, I don't know. Maybe he's being snarky. Maybe I'm reading it snarky because I can get snarky like that. Maybe he just said, you said. You said, I have made a covenant. Maybe he's being humble like that. But this Maria, I would be like, you said. You're the one that made a covenant. And that's, I think, the point that he's trying to make. That Ethan is trying to tell God, you initiated this covenant with David. It wasn't like David said, Father, you love me so much. Let's make a covenant. Let's make a deal. You bless me and I'll serve you forever. No, that's not how it went down. It did not go down like that. God initiated this covenant with David. It was God who started the whole thing. He started the conversation. God initiated the covenant, this covenant with David. He called David his chosen one. He called David his servant. Okay, now have a few minutes. My friends, listen, there's a huge difference between making a covenant and going into a contract. I'm going to say that again. There's a huge difference between making a covenant or making a contract. And God knew exactly what he was doing. He initiated a covenant. He didn't initiate a contract. And let me tell you, Israel knew this oh so well. They knew it oh so well. They too knew there's a difference, a major difference, between a covenant and a contract. Now, listen, I don't mean to be or sound offensive, but if I'm involved in a court situation, guess who I want as my lawyer? That's right, you guessed right. A Jewish lawyer. Why? Because they know and understand the law like nothing else. They can argue, they can, what's that word, articulate, they will find loopholes. Thank you, Debbie. Debbie writes, there's a difference between a covenant and a contract. They will find the loopholes. Now, listen, if you're Jewish, don't get mad at me for saying I want a Jewish lawyer, right? Because even though I'm Puerto Rican, I'm also Ashkenazi Jewish. So I think I have a right to say I want my own people. I want my own people to represent me. But recently, I was listening to this YouTube teacher. His name is Myron Golden, and he was saying how God he doesn't make contracts. Why? Because contracts can be broken. They can be changed. They can be broken. So if you, let's say you sign a contract, a lease, whatever, right? And you have a very good $500 an hour lawyer, and you need to get out of that contract, your $500 an hour lawyer, he's going to break or change that contract for you. But a covenant is different. It's so hard to break a covenant. Marriage is not a contract, it's a covenant. And I cannot get into it because I'm out of time. But a covenant is very difficult to be broken. And our Heavenly Father, He was so wise. He went into a covenant with the people of Israel. So now that we understand that God initiated this covenant, let's read what Ethan wrote again in verse 3. He said, "You said, I have made a covenant with my chosen one. I have sworn to David, my servant. I will establish your line forever and make your throne firm through all generations." That was the covenant. That was the covenant. And I'm out of time. I have so much more to say. So much more to say about what this covenant represented and about what God was trying to establish and why He was doing it. But we'll get into it, okay? We'll get into it. So, again, we're going to talk about this on, God willing, on Monday. Does God keep His promises? Those are the questions. Those are the angles that we're coming from. Does God keep His promises? Ethan was confronting God. This chief musician was confronting God on this very, very question. You know, God, do you keep your promises? Because you said you went into covenant with David. Can anything happen that would change God's mind and cause Him to go back on what He promised? Now, we just said a covenant can't be broken. It can't be broken. Some covenants are broken. But in God's perspective, it cannot be broken. So will God go back on a promise? Does He create conditions for His promises? Those are the things that we're going to go dive into when we get back on this next week. Okay? So we're going to end it here. Thank you for tuning in. I pray that the Lord bless you, that the Lord keep you, that the Lord make His face to shine on you and be gracious to you. And I pray that the Lord lift up His countenance toward you and give you shalom. Thank you, David. I mean, Debbie, I just, his thing just come out of my mouth. His name, David's name constantly. Thank you, Debbie, for writing that. I will see you back here, God willing, on Monday. We're going to dive into part 2 of Psalm 89. You be blessed. Have a great weekend and enjoy. Ciao, ciao.